Hey guys, thanks for tuning in for the second episode of A Great Conversation with our guest Dan Murrell. He gives a great interview here, and I'm so excited for you guys to hear it. Dan is obviously a class act, as you have known him from everywhere, and if you don't know all about Dan, you're about to get to know him. Be sure to leave a comment below, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell if you guys want to be alerted when we post new videos and when I go live for live streams. If you're watching this and you want to listen to it on audio, you can get us on iTunes, Spotify, pretty much anywhere you can find a podcast. Otherwise, guys, the second show on the channel, Song from the Scene, is going to be launching this week. I'm really excited to look out for it. It's something that is very near and dear to my heart, and I hope you guys enjoy. And last but not least, guys, enjoy the show. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of A Great Conversation here on the Nerds in Suits Network. I have an incredible guest today, somebody I am so honored to be bringing on, somebody who's doing really, really exciting stuff right now, and somebody who I've actually gotten to know recently and call my friend, which is pretty cool. Give it up for the one, the only, the greatest of all time, Mr. Dan Murrell.
Yeah, what's up, man?
How you doing, dude? Welcome to Nerds in Suits.
Thank you. I like it. I very rarely wear suits. I'm like nerds in flannel.
Yeah, so trust me, man. I know I've impersonated you before. I had to go get a shirt. I still have the shirt, and the jeans and the hat, and the glasses. I have the whole bit of it. I think
it's a great ensemble. It's very comfortable. I mean, it's really more like nerds in plaid. A lot of people say flannel. I have very few flannel shirts. It's plaid. It's nerds in plaid for me.
Flannel's pretty warm for Los Angeles.
I'm very hot natured, so flannel doesn't do it for me.
Yeah. So we're recording this on a Thursday. You're 4 days into the launch of Dan Murrell Movies. Is it called Dan Murrell Movies? Is that the name of the channel?
It's technically Dan Murrell. The URL, the YouTube URL is Dan Murrell Movies because someone else had Dan Murrell, so I figured movies was a pretty logical thing to put on there. But yeah, Dan Murrell Movies. I'll answer to either one.
Okay, very good, very good. And how's the? I mean, we're all in quarantine, so it's like we'd be working from home anyway. But how's the hustle of working from home?
I mean, yeah, it's weird because, when I was working still with Screen Junkies, it was starting to feel a little kind of claustrophobic because we're used to working together and everything's got to be over Zoom. But I'd be doing the same thing either way. So it's actually kind of energized it in the sense that I don't think about the routine and I don't think about the fact that I can't leave or that things are different because, every day now is just really for the last couple of weeks really leading up to the launch, but especially since we launched is every minute of every day is taken now. It's working on the Patreon, working on the Discord, saying hi to people there, making stuff for the YouTube channel. Yesterday was getting an AMA ready. Today was shooting a review, and then it's going to be editing a review. And I'm still doing a couple things for Honest Trailers and Screen Junkies. So it's actually kind of gotten my mind off of everything because there's so much new stuff to do every day that it's literally from the time I would get up to the time my head hits the pillow, I've got just a list of stuff to do.
Yeah, I can relate to it because Action Industries, the brand I've been running with Andrew Guy for years now, takes up so much of our time. And we've really learned that everything, if you want to do it right, takes a thumbnail and it takes the scheduling and it takes the editing and all. And so now that I'm doing this, Nerds in Suits, it's this is my little sliver. I'm just doing this because I've always wanted to do these interviews. And so but it's still the same thing. I have to come up with clever thumbnails and other things of that nature. So but anyway,
I was literally, like I told you right before we came here, I stopped I cut on my Picard review and I immediately was just I gotta do this thing. So yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, so I've had the good fortune of getting to know you a little bit more these last few months. We both compete in the Movie Trivia Schmoedown, and we had this match in Atlanta that was kind of a one for the ages. And so since then, it's been a lot of fun. The wall, so to speak, has been broken down. I can text Dan Murrell now. I actually know you. And more than that, when you came on the Action Guys recently, we started talking movies, and I started to see you've got a little bit of the similar taste. You love The Rock. You've got some of those movies that you really, really love. And one of the things I've talked to you so much about that really just that the thing that I've wanted to talk to you the most about really is you made this incredible 10 years of movies in the 2010s video for Screen Junkies, the Supercut. And I watched it. I've probably watched it 15 or 20 times. I've cried pretty much every time I've watched it. I've discovered movies and scenes in movies that I had never seen before from little clips. Al Pacino dancing and Jack and Jill being one of them.
Yes, Dunkachino.
Dunkachino, it's incredible. It's amazing. And like I feel like that movie is elevated above all of the other crap in the latter half of his career for that one scene.
That scene is like I'll put it up there with like Salvador Dali and like of the great surreal art of our time. The Dunkachino scene from Jack and Jill is right up near the top for me.
It's not Al anymore. It's Dunk.
Dunkachino, don't mind if I do. And just oh my god, it's insane.
And his dancing in the one part that you clipped is pretty impressive. It's actually really well choreographed.
I mean, these old school guys, they had to know how to do everything. So It's pretty crazy.
So talking about the supercut, I know you've done an incredible number of videos for Screen Junkies over the years, and that has kind of just been your whole story as, doing video content at this point. So when you were working on that one, did you already know there was a chance that in the near future you would no longer be there, or you didn't know yet?
I did. Actually, in many ways, I kind of because I originally was just going to do one for the year. I was going to do one for 2019 because we had done a couple of them before, but this year JTE used to do them for us, but he moved, and so there wasn't really one on the schedule. So I was like, I like to edit. I'll take that on. But then I realized like, oh wait, we're at the end of a decade, and it was not certain, but it was trending in that direction that it looked like I was going to be leaving. So in a lot of ways, I did kind of regard that as a sort of goodbye to that decade, not just for movies, but kind of that's a lot of the stuff that happened while I was working at Screen Junkies. We covered a lot of those movies and we talked about a lot of those movies. So yeah, that had a little extra poignance for me because I did have in the back of my mind that it was very likely that it would mark close to the end of my tenure there.
So it's a really emotional video. You pick some great stuff in there. I mean, I especially like the song that you start with, Montage from Swiss Army Man, which is a film I've never seen, but I looked the song up because I liked it so much. And you get to the end and you get to the final one, and it's these real tearjerker moments. Did you find yourself when you watched it when it was done, because of what it meant to you, getting a little emotional yourself? Or you toiled over for too long?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Is it's so difficult because I mean that was very much a passion project. So that was done, in bits and pieces over a couple months, and then really seriously over like Christmas break was when I put in a lot of work into it. So I think probably looking back, I might be a little more moved by it because there's always little things that I don't like, or like there's like a cursor in one shot because I had to get a screen capture of one shot that I didn't have an HD version of. So but I left the cursor in the middle. So every time I can only focus on that. But I'm very proud of it. I will say that. I think that I set out to include not just the blockbusters and the big movies, but also the little movies and some international film. And I'm very happy that with the spectrum of film that it represents over those 10 years. So it's definitely a piece that I'm extremely proud of. I'm as proud of that as anything that I produced while I was there.
Did you get to the end of it and then realize you had missed a movie? Did that happen or no?
I mean, I kind of had to. I had to come to grips with the fact early on that I could never even include every movie I wanted to put in because it just wasn't possible. And so yeah, there were a bunch of movies that I wanted to put in that I just didn't because I also wanted to make sure that it was representative of the actual picture of film. So there's Twilight in there because it would be disingenuous to say that 10 years that from a box office and a cultural perspective that Twilight wasn't a big part of a few years in the middle there. So I even put in some movies that I'm not even a big fan of, but it would be disingenuous to say I'm not going to write history as far as what was important or what was popular and what wasn't. So yeah, there's a bunch of films that I probably would have loved to have put in there, but at the same time, I also wanted to include, the true picture of what was popular and what was successful. Although I could not bring myself to put in a Transformers movie.
I couldn't bring myself
to do it.
You have an aversion to those ones, I know.
I'm not a fan. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, though. So one of the shows on this channel that I'm launching to go along with this one is this show called Song from the Scene. And so the idea with the show is that, there's all these movies that have an original piece of music written for it. And some of them are even like, a very like Sing Street's a great example. Like that's a movie that like it's all just original music. But even like Transformers, the first one has a Goo Goo Dolls song called Before It's Too Late that was written for the soundtrack. And it plays in like a key moment when like Sam and Michaela hold hands for the first time. And in 2007, when I saw it for the first time, I was like, I love this movie. And I'm basically going to break down these scenes and then cover the songs, on acoustic guitar. And so that's like my new show. I'm very excited about it. And it's funny that even in a movie as crappy and I think Transformers 1 gets a bad rap, but even as bad
as bad as the others, no.
You can still find, redeeming qualities. And I think that's one of the great things about the video that you made. I do love at the end of it that you include the Logan shot because it turns the grave into an X, which obviously represents the 2010s. Is Logan close to your heart?
I love Logan. I think that's a great movie. And including that at the end, I wish I could say that I realized from the beginning that was what that was. I literally was just trying to think of a good shot to end on and something that was very kind of emotional. And I landed on that. And then I realized once I put it in, I'm like, oh shit, that X is a 10, just like the decade. Yeah. So it was dumb luck. But yeah, I like Logan a lot. I think that, I was a little suspicious going in because especially when you're bringing back characters and then you're going for a different vibe, it can come off a little try hard. But I loved what they did with it. I think Hugh Jackman is a brilliant actor. I think they're so lucky that they got, because there's no way you could know, because he was cast on really short notice for the first X-Men movie.
With Dougray Scott, right? He was supposed to do it?
Yeah, he was supposed to do it, and then I think Mission Impossible ran over, so he couldn't do it, and you bring in Hugh Jackman on short notice. There's no way they could have known at the time how good he would turn out to be. And so I think it's a beautifully written movie. It's a beautifully shot movie. Patrick Stewart is great in it. Top to bottom, really. I was really impressed with Logan. I like that movie a lot.
Shay, on rewatch recently for the show, The Greatest Movie Ever Made, we're doing over on Action Industries. I think that's Jackman's best performance. I actually really thought about it hard after the fact, because the big 4 or 5 are probably like Prisoners, Les Mis, The Prestige. Maybe there's one other one in there. But it has so much depth and nuance because of what that character has meant. And he has to bring so much, he's so scared of the world in that character, I think. And that's such an interesting part of it.
I would probably give it, personally, I think, even though I was very disappointed in the film version of it, I think I would give it to Les Mis. I just think he's phenomenal in that film, but his performance in Logan, I think, is top notch. I mean, it is one of his best for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So, all right, we talk movies all the time. We don't need to, but I know one thing we both do is we think about movies a lot. In this game, the Movie Trivia Schmoedown, that we both play and compete in. I guess compete, probably play is the wrong word. We had this match recently, going head to head in Atlanta. It was a big one. It was one for the ages, one that I'll always remember playing in. Are you at a point now in your career in the Movie Trivia Schmoedown where you feel like there's nothing left to prove, or do you feel like there's still something left?
I don't necessarily think there's anything left to prove. There's definitely things I'd like to accomplish. The idea of going into Inner Geekdom and competing to get that, to win the 3 belts, IG, singles, and teams. I'm not motivated necessarily by wanting to prove anything or feeling like I have to do that for people to consider me this or that. It's more just like I like to set a goal for myself, and I like to set a challenge for myself. And I think that's a real challenge, and it's a challenge that a lot of people have attempted, and nobody's done it so far. It's very possible somebody could do it before I get there. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not going to want to do it at that point. It'd be nice to be first. I'm not going to lie. But I guess I would say that, yeah, I feel like I felt like when I came back, especially before I played Ethan for that first championship belt, I did feel like I had something to prove, in the sense that I had to prove that I could still play at a level and that I wasn't sort of a relic of the old times. But I don't think I really have anything left to prove at this point. It's more about personal accomplishments and goals and what I would just like to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, winning is awesome, and there's more of it to be done. So I guess on a base level, that's cool. Yeah. Talking about going back to the match we played, because it's the last live event that we got to do before all the shenanigans started. And
yeah, no kidding.
It's weird at the time, it just didn't even, I remember people wiping down seats on the airplane to and from Atlanta.
Yeah, it was because Mara had some issues where we had to be careful about that, so we were already wiping down seats, and she'd been wearing a mask for a while, so it was something that was kind of in our brains, but I don't remember because it was probably less than a month before everybody really started going into lockdown mode. But yeah, it's weird to think of that world where just get on a plane, go out to eat, go to a restaurant, go to a big crowded venue, and high fiving and fist bumping and meet and greets and everything. And it just seems like such a relic of the past at this point, but it wasn't that long ago.
It was so recently, yeah. So we all go out to Atlanta, and I know you had been. I managed you in New York at the end of January, and then after that, we kind of went into like preparation mode, and it was interesting. We haven't gotten to really, unpack this experience. I think some fans kind of know a little bit of it, but like there was like the interesting stuff when I was in New York, and I called you, and John and I were talking about the management stuff, and it was like, hey man, what do you think about? And it was so weird because it's like we're on the same faction, and we're trying to. But we also both want to win. So there was this weird line I felt like we were towing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, honestly, that would have been a pretty easy situation for us to navigate if it were just sort of like a regular sports league where you play the game and then behind the scenes you have all these discussions that happen. I think the unique thing about the Schmoedown is that in addition to being a trivia contest, it's also a show. So in the midst of us trying to figure out that situation, at every turn, there were people that would then go out publicly and make declarations and stuff and be like, we're doing this. And like, they wouldn't talk to me, or they wouldn't talk to you, or they wouldn't talk to John, so you got Finstock saying one thing, and then you're saying that John's saying one thing, and then and it snowballed into this whole thing. And I think like, that's the thing about I think it was a fairly simple thing. Cause I remember when you called me, like we talked about it, and like, it was pretty, if left to our own devices, I think it was pretty easy because I was like, you know what, man, I hear you. Let me talk to John. Let me see what he's thinking. Let me see where his head is. And like, let's revisit it later today. But then like later that day, I think like public proclamations being made. And it's like, what happened? I didn't. So it was one of those things where it's like, it was the product of being part of a show where you have to generate stuff consistently, and people want in on these things backstage and knowing what's going on.
Well, I think that's what makes the show so good, and I think we got obviously a great event, but I think the theater leading up to the event was just as good. And it was interesting too because you said this I was in Germany for work, and I was listening to you on backstage, and you were talking about you're like, now that I've said this, I know Ben knows that I know this, and I'm really got to think, he's like, you're like very careful about anything that you say publicly because, and you were right. I mean, that's the way I play, right? It's not like I'm spying on you or anything like that, but I'm definitely trying to put a strong strategy together.
Yeah, no, and I'm used to that. Like I had a competitor come up to me who it was actually a tactical mistake about a year and a half ago. It was like, yeah, I know you've been watching a bunch of this lately. Is like because I'm helping Oyama track what you're watching. So I noticed you've been watching a lot of I think it was John Hughes lately, and I was just like, oh man. So now I have to watch what I log, and it's nothing new. It's definitely nothing new. I get it. It's I think there's a lot of like when we were talking about the opponents. There's another thing that happened that I would like. I don't think I ever said anything that publicly about it, but like the whole opponent's choice and spinner's choice thing, which was I think John had said that I said it was disrespectful, which I don't remember saying that. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I don't remember saying disrespectful. I remember saying like I was surprised because in my mind we both have two different things. Like in my mind, it's always like, well, I'm not going to put it on there because I don't want to feel like it's luck if I win or lose. I want it to be a clean game, but that's how I play. And in your mind, it's a tactical advantage. And to not do it would be giving away potentially a tactical advantage, which, by the way, it definitely was for you. So it all comes down to like so many different factors in gameplay and how you view the game and how someone else views the game. And I think a lot of times people rush to saying what's the right way to play and what's the wrong way to play. And I don't really think, as far as strategy goes, that there is a right or a wrong play. There's just the way that you play the game. Yeah,
if you win, it turns out to be right, and if you lose, it's probably people will point the finger. So I know that when you played, obviously long before this match we played, it was much more of a knowledge versus knowledge game. Do you like the aspect of the game now that we all are sort of forced to embrace the much more sports league tactical?
It definitely adds an interesting wrinkle to it. I think that there's always that thing of if you lose on a bad spin of the wheel, and actually after many times Frankie Numbers finally ran the numbers, and I have hit opponent's choice more than anyone else. So I probably also have an aversion to that being on the wheel because I have hit it a lot. I think that it's just an adjustment that you have to make. And for example, like it may not necessarily inform how I play the game, but it does inform how I prepare for the game. And it definitely informed how I prepared to play you. It does change how you prep and the scenarios you run in your head, because it's like, okay, well, if I'm thinking about what's going to go on the wheel, if I'm playing Bibiani, for example, then when I think about what's going on the wheel, I'm probably going to be more in the mode of like, what does he know? What does he feel like he's strong in? What does he have a deep knowledge base on? Whereas when I'm playing you, like I'm thinking about what you're going to put on the wheel, I'm going to think, okay, what does he think that I don't know? Or what does he think that I think he'll put on the wheel? Or what does he think I'll put on the wheel? And it changes the cadence of how you get ready for a match. Definitely.
Okay, and I won't ask you to give any information away here because we will hopefully be playing again this year. When you saw the wheel, were you surprised with what you were expecting, or was it you pretty much got what you thought?
I fully expected you to put Tyler Perry on the wheel.
You did?
Yeah, because I knew that, number one, it's a new category, and so not a lot of people know a lot about it. Number two, I figured that you would probably put it on there knowing that I probably didn't know about it and would study, which you did, and that you would to know about it, and that would give you, as I mentioned, a tactical advantage. But also, I was also kind of expecting Tyler Perry to be on the wheel anyway, regardless.
He's from Atlanta.
He's from Atlanta, and we were in Atlanta. So I was expecting Tyler Perry to be on the wheel. When I saw it on there, I was pretty sure that you'd put it on there, but at the same time, not completely sure that you'd put it on there. And yeah, like I said, I guess initially I was a little surprised to see Spinners and Opponent's Choice there, but I had also kind of anticipated that because, like I said, you're a tactical player, and that is a tactical. It could also be a disadvantage, by the way, tactical disadvantage, But totally. you, I know that you'll roll the dice on stuff like that. Everything else, like I still don't know exactly what you put on the wheel, other than that. But other than that, nothing really took me aback or shocked me. It looked like pretty like, okay, yeah, that's about the wheel I was expecting.
Yeah. So let's talk about this for a second, the Parry moment, because I think a lot of people have, when they've talked about this match, there's a couple big moments that I think everybody wants to, and you and I have never really gotten to break it down. Yeah. So you go up in round one, and you're up 9-6, which is a great way to start, and it's a very Dan Murrell way to start because 9 points in round one at this point for you is like second nature. And
best I could do, yeah.
And so I spin and I hit. I end up on Nora Ephron, which I understand now. Roka's been very clear that was your category. You never told me that. And I think they're mostly pretty answerable questions. Julie Kavner being the only hard one.
Yeah. But I mean, she's the lead of a very obscure movie, which I think is a pretty good wheel question.
Yeah, totally.
I think if it was like, who's the lead of When Harry Met Sally, you're like, oh, come on. But I think who's the lead of maybe, other than I think Cookie, maybe her least known movie, I think that's fair game. That's totally fair game.
Yeah. So I end up, picking up 1 point there because you end up getting 7 in the I think it's Anne Hathaway.
Hathaway. Yeah.
And the funny part about that is, and John told me that you guys in the green room were doing your drills and getting ready, and we had both gone over the quick description of the categories, and when we both did the same thing on Colossal, which is studied up and made sure we knew the leads, made sure we knew the year and the director, but we didn't read the description of the country.
I'd seen Colossal too. I was so disappointed in myself, but it was like 2 or 3 years before it. I just didn't remember. I could not remember for the life of me. I was hoping the answer would be Jason Sudeikis because I was like, Jason Sudeikis. Right. Yeah. No, it was not, unfortunately. I was bummed.
And I was bummed I missed the steal because the irony of the whole match is that there's all these different moments that I could have picked up 1 point, and every one of the times I could have picked up 1 point that I didn't is in the end why I lost, right? And so that's one of those moments where it's just like it could go a step further. But so we get to the third round, and this is like the big dramatic moment in the match because obviously you spin, and on the betting round, you hit opponent's choice. And so and you walked over to Roca, am I correct? And you said he's going to go Tyler Perry, right?
I was almost convinced you were going to go Tyler Perry. Yeah.
Yeah. So you make one of the great decisions in the history of the Schmoedown, in the history of league play, in betting 0 points, which is a fascinating and brilliant move, because in the end, the difference between that and 1 point is, once again, what won you the match. Yeah. Was there any hesitation? Did John challenge you on it, or you were like, this is the right thing to do?
There was definitely hesitation. I mean, I was looking at it in a way. I was looking past really the third round into the fourth round and the speed round, and I was looking at how I do in the speed round, and I was looking at how you do in the speed round, and I said, okay, I think at that point we were tied, or it was like, I was up by 1 or up by 2. I was up by 1, so I was like, okay, I'm going to go in with the assumption that Ben is going to sweep the speed round. I'm going to go into the assumption that I get nothing in the speed round. So it's like, okay, what's the best case and worst case scenario of this right here? And I'm like, I have no confidence in the category that I'm going to know any question in this category. So I'm like, it's 1 or 0. And then I basically put myself in the position of what positions me best for Ben to run the speed round, and for me to be down going into the final round. And John was like, "What do you think? 1 or 0? 1 or 0?" And I was kind of going back and forth. I was like, "I don't know, man. Like, I don't know." And he was like, "Well, he's like, well, how confident are you?" I'm like, "I have none." He's like, "I don't know." It's like, "You want to go 0?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So yeah, it was literally just that discussion, and me just sort of saying, like, I have to assume that I'm going to be in a hole following the speed round, because I know that that's a strength for you and a weakness for me. That's not giving away a strategic thing at all. It's obvious if you've ever watched me play a championship match, the speed round is just not my strong suit. So it was just the assumption of putting myself in the least bad position going into the next round. And I was just like, I don't want to lose points. If Ben bets 3 and gets 3, which I think you did, then I'm down, but I'm not down big. I could potentially go down big if I lose a lot of points. So it was just a bit of strategy that happened to, in that moment in that game, be one of the moments that led to the end of it.
I think one of the things that people have asked me a lot about in that moment is the specific answer that I have to give there to get the 3 points, because a lot of younger players like to think, okay, you put a weakness on the category on the wheel for your opponent, thinking that, you can control the game. But basically, I got the version of that category that's supposed to sink you for making that kind of mistake, which is a plot-based question. Yeah. And I had done the deep dive to make sure that I could answer those questions, but it was so close to being exactly the opposite. If I had gone one step left, I would have just, match was over at that point.
It's crazy how, you replay a match in your head. And there have even been some of the exhibition matches looking at how they go, where you look at the scores at the end and who's where, and I think you can go back through all those matches and say, like, oh, if someone had just done this or just done that, right, or just gone here or bet this or not bet that, or it completely changes the tone and the tempo of the match. It's crazy how one little thing like that can change the momentum of a match, and that gave you the momentum easily.
Yeah, I mean, I was on Schmoebates last night. We were talking about the greatest comeback, and I was like, I think that the Murrell comeback in round 5 is the greatest comeback, because I think after the speed round, I mean, which I make the one mistake, but I pick up 3 points there. We're going into the last round. Had you resigned, like, I'm just going to do what I can do, and I basically lost, or you still had the fighting spirit?
No, I mean, John will tell you, I was, I didn't quit, obviously, but I was sort of resigned to the fact. I mean, I think I said to him, I just said, like, hey man, I just want to answer all my questions and make sure that this isn't a TKO. Like, I want to go out fighting. It's like, I don't think it's my night. He's having a good night. I want to put up a fight. I don't want to get KO'd. I want to force him to answer questions. And John was like, shut your mouth. Stop talking like that. You can get your ass out there and answer those questions. And so I was like, all right. But yeah, no, I had pretty much, going into that final round, I had pretty much, like, I was 95% resigned to the fact that, like, hey, listen, it ain't my night, but I'm going to go out there and I'm going to try to answer all these questions, because I want to at least force Ben to answer questions so that I can say that it went all the way to the end.
Yeah, it was, and so then it gets to the final round. Obviously, the infamous Nick and Nora question, which is I've heard so many arguments on the validity of that as a 5-point question, but it is.
If I may make a counterpoint,
yeah.
Like, They say that was an easier 5-point question. I
Yeah.
would argue that my 3-point question was more difficult
Far more
than your
difficult.
average 3-point question would be, which would be like, who was the lead, not even the lead, but who was part of an ensemble cast of a Sidney Lumet film that, like Ingrid Bergman, like if it had been like who won the Oscar,
Right. Yeah.
or murder, like that's a very prominent thing. But like to name a ensemble member of the Murder on the Orient Express movie that came out in the 70s, to me, I think is a little bit more difficult than your average 3-point question. So, the whole thing of arguing question difficulty, I get it. And if it's egregious, then I could see there being a debate, but there's always going to be some fluctuation in the difficulty of those questions.
But I think there always will be. And I think every great player has won or lost matches on the good fortune or the terrible fortune of that, and that's happened to me too. So,
yeah.
But yeah, so the match is obviously an incredible one, and one I was very proud to be in with you, and I hope that we get to do it again. You guys are still the team champs as well, so now Riley and I have a path, it seems, to have a shot to get back there.
Yeah, I mean, they asked. I was on Roka's show not too long ago, and they asked who would our preferred opponents be, assuming we get past corruption, and I said it was you guys, because in a vacuum, when we have to face a great team, because if you get to that championship level, you're a great team. I prefer the team that we also don't have that pressure on us that if we lose, then it goes to a different faction and all that stuff. So, I obviously would prefer, number one, I think it'd be a great game, a lot of history there between everybody, and then number two, it's great to be in another situation where win or lose, at least our faction comes out on top and retains the belts.
It would mean a lot to me to get Riley a belt. I think at this point in his career, I feel like he's gotten such the short end of the stick. His legacy has been so cast aside by the history books in such an unfair way. And people people just do not acknowledge. When I play with Riley, sure, I know how to control the game better than he does because that's my strength, but Riley knows more than I do. Period, bar none, no question. Riley is on the level of you and Roka and Bibiani. He's an all-time level guy with that stuff, and it would mean a lot to get that guy a belt.
I agree. I think that people that played in the sort of pre-show era, in the sense of like at the stage it is now, they get slighted in a way. And I agree. Like Mark is a champion, and played some of the greats in the game, beat some of the greats of the game. So I agree that it would be, I would love to see, I would not be sad to see our belts go over to you and Mark, because I know that you are both champions. You would deserve it. And, just on a personal level, you're our friends, and it's great. It's like sharing that. It's like when people ask about Mara and I, if we ever had to play each other in Intergeekdom, if that should happen, like we're fine with it, because whoever wins, we're giving the belt to somebody that we love. So it's great.
Yeah, it's awesome. Now speaking of all of our friends, Roka and Riley, everybody's kind of got a channel now. Everybody's doing this thing. Obviously it's kind of the world we live in now. But I think one of the most interesting parts about that is that when you started at Screen Junkies, when Christian and Mark started the Schmoes, when I started at AfterBuzz, there was no such thing as the revenue stream, as the model to survive that there is now. Mm-hmm. It didn't exist. You could very comfortably, and I would even argue that as recently as a year ago, the revenue stream felt very different. It did not feel anywhere near as secure or optimistic. Was there, when can you pinpoint the moment when you sort of looked at and you were like, you know what, I think I can support myself by making content because of the fan base, the brand that I've now spent 8 years building?
I mean, I think I was certainly encouraged by the fact that so many of our friends that were at Collider, who were sort of really just coldly and suddenly and unfairly just kind of tossed out, were able to establish themselves. That to me said that like there is a path toward being able to do this kind of thing. And not only that, but like there's room for more than one or two people. Like it can support a community of people, because you're right. Particularly when I started at Screen Junkies back in 2012, the YouTube model was at a point where it had gone through that first 4 years at that time of like people in their living rooms making stuff, and then like companies realizing that a lot of people were watching it, and they were all getting gobbled up by these big corporations. Like, Smosh was bought by Break Media, which became Defy. All of these content creators were being given these huge well, you would think they were being given huge paychecks. A lot of them, and Smosh, Anthony, I think from Smosh has been very upfront about this, was like they were paid in like stock options for this company that never went public, and basically, you know, promised a bunch of money later, but also were paid, you know, given salaries and ad rev and stuff like that. And I think what kind of made me realize that this was you've seen it now go the other way, because all of these content creators, these companies realize that like you can do it on your own and make an okay margin, because your overhead is like you and where you live and your equipment and you whatever it costs to make what you're making, but that's it. And then all of these companies that have overhead with HR and office space and renting and all of this stuff, they realize that the margins aren't big enough to support 50 people doing this necessarily. There's some that can do it, and that's great. Or they're diversifying, which is awesome. That's a large part of what fandom's been doing as well. But I like the fact that YouTube and the creative space is now where it's all sort of going back to its roots of people independently making things, and finding now the audience sort of understands and is trained to know that to pay them to do it isn't charity. It's like paying for cable or something else. It's somebody's producing something for you, and it's a transaction. But it's also a community. I think it's the best parts of both things.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating point you make about the margins being so difficult to support, and how sort of the larger corporate side of this is, you know, farming out talent like that is really, really, really hard to do, and not really something that's very sustainable. But that we're now all in this place, and I think this is the other major factor that I'm noticing. The term YouTuber is a term that at one time had this connotation of being like real kind of childish, like
amateur.
And you see what's happening right now, and you see David Spade interviewing Adam Sandler from his home because his show got canceled. You see Ellen or Oprah, and they're doing Skype and Zoom shows with their friends, and what's the platform that you're going to release content on? I mean, you can release stuff on your Instagram or TikTok or Twitter, but YouTube is the most easily digestible and well understood video platform in the world that's not television. And
yeah,
everyone's using it. So why aren't we just like, you know, it's like, I guess the production value difference is the thing that people will point to. It's like,
but that gap is closing so much now, because it's not just that, you know, the cameras now that people have are you can make a similar looking stuff to something that could be produced in a studio at an affordable level. You can get, you know, quality audio now. It doesn't have to look amateurish. People are able to do things on their own budgets and in their own facilities that can match or come close to the production budgets of what these big companies can do. And so again, it comes down to, what are you making? What is it that you're providing? What is the content of your content, if you will? Although I don't like that word content. I think it just sort of homogenizes everything.
Yeah.
But that's what I kind of see, is like there was the stratification that happened where these big companies were picking and choosing which YouTubers were to be recognized and which ones were not to be recognized. And as we're now going into this, what I think is the second cycle, it's going back to the audience saying like, no, we'll decide who we want to pay attention to and who we want to watch, and we'll support them ourselves. And you know, you don't have that power anymore. And I think it really does go back to the roots of what YouTube is supposed to be. And I hope that they notice that and pay attention to that, and help and assist and give more of that power back to and support to those creators, because, you know, there's so many people that I talk to, you know, in particularly the movie space, that when YouTube started getting a little more corporate, and when they started, you know, allying themselves, things like copyright strikes and stuff, they were just kind of allowing, and still are in a lot of places, allowing companies to run rampant and strike videos for no reason and not provide any explanation or no real recourse to remedy that. And I hope that they recognize, and they've taken some small steps, but I hope they continue to recognize that, like, you know, you're serving the creators and you're serving the audience. And yes, you obviously have to work with corporations and companies, but like that's your key audience and that's your key demographic.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the thing that is so cool and so encouraging about all of it is that, you know, I think somebody, can't remember who it was, but somebody once said and told me, you don't need 1 million fans. You need 1,000 loyal fans to make a living as a creator. You need 1,000 loyal fans who will, because those 1,000 loyal fans, they'll buy your book. They'll basically keep you in business if you really are loyal to them and you create something they want. And I think that idea is kind of accurate, because it really does mean that if you have a vision and you believe in it and you really believe in the content, and I hate that word, but you're making that, you have a way to connect. So, I mean, I guess the question I have for you is like, can you elevator pitch me the content you're making? I mean, like, well, the vision for Dan Murrell, like, what's the thing that you want to be doing that you're the most excited about?
I mean, it's the fact that, you're right. The old way of thinking is, and honestly, the old way that it worked was, especially on YouTube, that in order to make a living, quote unquote, at it, you had to have big traffic. You had to make a lot of ad rev. You had to bring in X amount of viewers per video, because you had to get those pre-rolls, because that was really your only reliable source of income, was how much ad rev are you generating. So that means that you're generally making stuff that is aimed at the biggest things that people want to see, which is definitely worth talking about. For movies, it's DC, it's Marvel, it's Star Wars, it's stuff like that, because that's how you survive, because you have to bring in that interest. People have to click. I think that what we're seeing now and what I hope to build is, obviously I love all of that stuff and I'm going to talk about all that stuff, but I've been very forward about the fact that, like, this is largely going to be a lot of the things that I'm interested in, which are the big movies, but it's also classic movies. It's also independent film. There is a hunger for people out there, and it may be a smaller audience, but like you said, now the way that it works is, if you can have a devoted and loyal smaller audience, that can help make up the difference, whether that's through Patreon, whether that's through Streamlabs and Super Chat and doing Q&As, or whether that's just through a loyal audience that watches all your stuff. I think that what I want to do is build a channel that's, yes, it's what I'm interested in, but it's building a community with my audience and talking to them and being open. And what do they want to know about? What do they want to know more about? I did a poll on my Patreon page today. And the last time I checked, I kind of said, like, what are you guys looking forward to the most? And, movie reviews was up there, but like the top vote getters were like, we want recommendations. We want to hear about Criterion Collection movies. That would be great. We want to hear about, like, things that we haven't seen, or for you to find stuff. Like, I was talking yesterday in the Q&A about how the fact that I don't know anything about Miyazaki movies. I've never seen one. And now, since I said that, there's an immense amount of interest in the audience saying, like, oh my God, they're so good. Like, we want to take that journey with you and talk about you seeing those movies. So that's really my vision for the channel, is to find this sort of hub where we can talk about all kinds of movies, where I can bring movies to the audience, where they can bring movies to me, and you really discover movies together, because, there are more than 15 movies a year that come out that matter. There's a bunch, and there's a bunch that have come out that nobody talks about. And, let's do that. Let's talk about the big stuff. Let's talk about the little stuff too. And let's just sort of embrace this wide world of stuff, because there's so much amazing cinema and film out there to be found and talked about.
Do you have a favorite actor or actress?
Currently, I don't know if there's one in particular that I'm a huge, fan of, as in, like, oh, well, that's, people know that I love Toni Collette. I think that because of, my an Oscar for Toni campaign, but I also think that she just brings a this kind of lived-in quality to every character that she plays. Even when you see her pop up in Knives Out, it's a smaller role, but she's so good in it, and you get that character. It's because of her and what she brings to the role. But if we're talking classic film, I'm a big fan of Jack Lemmon. I love his roles, particularly, and Billy Wilder is one of my favorite directors. So seeing him work in the movies he did with Billy Wilder, I love. I think that in the 70s, you have Pacino and Hoffman, Dustin Hoffman, Faye Dunaway. I think had such a bright. A lot of the actors have just a segment in their career where they're just like a supernova, and I think that was Faye Dunaway for such a long time with Chinatown and Network and so many other films. I think she's fantastic. Oh man, it's almost like a paralysis by analysis because there's so many to think about and choose from. But I think in general, it really is. I'm drawn to authenticity. I'm drawn to truth. I'm drawn to somebody who's like, I think that Gene Wilder, in addition to being a great actor, a great comedic actor, I think is a great actor because he knew how to modulate a comedic performance, and he goes so far over the top, particularly in like The Producers and Blazing Saddles. Like, he knows when to go over the top and he knows when to pull it back. He can play big and he can play small, and that's not an easy thing to do. So I appreciate somebody who has that control over their range and can bring a very genuine quality to their performance. That really appeals to me as a fan.
Yeah, levels are really, really important to be able to moderate as a performer, right? I'm with you. I was wondering, just because I think a lot of us have our favorite performer, if there's still that sort of odd one movie or two that you've still always sort of meant to watch from a favorite performer, but you just never have for one reason or another.
Let's see. Trying to think if there's anything. I recently filled in Lawrence of Arabia. That was a big blind spot for me that I filled in. I've actually wanted to go back. I've seen Brando's major works and Godfather and Apocalypse Now and sort of the highlights of his career, but Streetcar Named Desire. But I've always wanted to go and see some of his other work. Some of even the remake of A Mutiny on the Bounty, which I haven't seen. That he was in.
The one from like 65, I think.
Yeah, I think it's from some in that era. Yeah. I feel like he's such an icon, and I've seen the roles of his that gained him that iconography and that status. But I want to go in and see some of those smaller performances that he did, because I've never actually seen a lot of those movies, and they were big movies for the time. I think that's also something that gets lost, is there could be a movie that's a massive hit in the era when it comes out, but over time it's sort of lost because the canon kind of shrinks the further you go. Like, the decades just become congealed to X amount of movies, and you lose some big movies in that process.
That's a weird thing that I've noticed has happened, and I notice this when I go back to watch movies from the older decades. And even honestly, just getting back to the 90s and the 80s, there's still like, you'll look up a movie and it'll be like, oh, like, to me, with how much I've heard of this movie, this feels like it's the equivalent of a Redbox film, like a movie that no one knew about. But then you look at it and you're like, okay, Malice with Nicole Kidman and Alec Baldwin. You're like, this was right in the heart of Nicole Kidman breaking out. This was the heart of Alec Baldwin as like a sex symbol. It's written by Aaron Sorkin. It's not, you can't even rent that movie on Amazon. You have to buy it. It's not available to be rented. Like, it's bizarre.
It's crazy. There's some movies like the one I always bring up is True Lies. James Cameron, Arnold Schwarzenegger at his peak, Jamie Lee Curtis, like, comeback role, unavailable in an HD format.
Is that really true right now?
Can't find it in HD.
Is that a Cameron thing? Because The Abyss was also unavailable for a while.
For a while it was. I don't know if it's a Cameron thing. I don't know if it's a Fox thing. I don't know what it is. But True Lies, when it came out, like, that was like the hit of the summer. Like, that was a big movie. And for it not to have the deluxe edition, or just not to be readily available in HD, it just, that would be unheard of for that type of movie to not be available in that kind of format today. But that's just, over time, some things just fall through the cracks. I'm sure somebody one day will be like, oh shit, we haven't done True Lies. I guess we should release that, huh? And but yeah, it's crazy how what falls through the cracks over time.
Yeah. Now, I mean, you've obviously been analyzing the different decades, all different movies through all different times, and you started in 2012 with Screen Junkies. You're leaving now in 2020. There were a couple different eras in your time there. I know you mentioned when you were on the Action Guys, when you started, you were doing off-camera stuff. You started to do more of the on-camera stuff. Movie Fights took off. You guys had Plus. There was all the big stuff that happened there when you guys kind of moved on to that next era of the company. Mm-hmm. Is there a period of time from working there that you look at as like that like brings warmth to your heart, like it's the golden era for you?
I mean, there are pockets of all those times. I think that sort of if you want to talk about like the first peak was understanding, because when we started, we were the Honest Trailer guys, or the Honest Trailers channel. People knew Honest Trailers, they didn't know Screen Junkies. They started the Screen Junkies show to sort of get the brand name of Screen Junkies out there, and even then people knew how. they thought he did the voice for the honest trailers. They thought it was one person. I think it was the understanding when we started doing movie fights that, and I think it was a turn in the internet too, because I think the YouTube audience itself was starting to lock in more closely on particular personalities and not just shows. And it was the understanding that like people actually care about discourse on movies and not just us throwing something out at them, but they want to be part of the discussion and they want to talk about it. So I would say that era, like right around 2015, 2014 to 2015, and understanding that there's an audience that wants to really engage in a discussion, that to me really sort of made me kind of sit up in my chair a little bit and go like, oh wow, like it's not just like, we're not just going to be only doing honest trailers forever. We can actually do film analysis. And that's when I started getting more into like, okay, well, could I do criticism? Can I review movies? Like, is that something that we can do as a brand? Will people enjoy that? And then, Screen Junkies Plus was in many ways a frustrating experience because I don't think that it was supported by the company that we worked with the way that it should have been. And that really handicapped us from the very, very start. But it was kind of the realization of the fact that there was a very solid group of people, a lot of whom I'm reconnecting now through Patreon now, who just love talking about movies. And to find that kind of passion and enthusiasm, that's where I got to do my first shows talking about Billy Wilder and Sidney Lumet. And I didn't have to worry about views. I didn't have to worry about click-through rate or how many people were commenting. Like, it was just making a show that people liked. That's all that mattered. That was very energizing to me also, because it showed that there was a path forward for that kind of thing.
Yeah, you mentioned Lumet. My favorite actor of all time is Paul Newman, and I think that The Verdict was one of those like perfect movies. It's a movie I always come back to. It's not only is it so good, but he's just perfect in that movie.
Sidney Lumet is a director that it's like you go down his filmography, and I really think you're going to be hard pressed to find a disappointment in there, because even a movie like The Verdict, which is not necessarily in the top 5 films that people talk about when they talk about Sidney Lumet, is great. Is so good. And that's what I mean when I talk about when you only hit the highlights and me wanting to go back and talk about Brando, like, or look at his filmography. Like, it's great to hit those highlights, but it's also weird what the process of canonization is and what people deem to be the essential works from a director and what the truth is. I mentioned on Roka's show very recently, we were talking about top 5 Hitchcock, and one of mine is a movie called Shadow of a Doubt, which not a lot of people put in the top 5, but which I think is brilliant. And everything that he does well as a director, the mystery, the sort of playfulness around murder and dark humor is all there. But, just because culturally it's been sort of decided that the essentials are Rear Window and Vertigo and North by Northwest and Psycho and The Birds, all great movies. But if you go even deeper down, you're going to find some great stuff there.
It's so weird with Hitchcock that like he had this string of hits between like 54 and 60, and that's largely defined his career. Even though Rebecca wins Best Picture in 1940, and he's got all these other movies in the 40s that are really great. Even go all the way back to I think like the late 20s as he's making movies. But it really is funny that little stretch of his career of about 7 years is like the main thing that anyone ever references.
Yeah.
So I remember when you guys launched Plus, I had just met Roxy Stryer actually, and she was doing a show called TV Fights, which was so cool. She was really excited. And, obviously things developed. The Plus thing didn't work as well as I guess you guys wanted it to. And there was a big move when Fandom bought the company. I'm trying to remember what year that was when Fandom
bought us. I believe that would have been 2018. Yeah.
So the sort of after like the big sort of falling out stuff when Phantom had purchased the company, do you remember feeling like the company had like a different, I guess, vision, a vibe, a tone, something that you connected to?
I think that well, first of all, and I mentioned this when I launched the channel, Fandom in a lot of ways kept our team together, because Defy about I guess a year or a little less than, or maybe a little more, it all runs together in my head. I think a little more than a year after we got bought, Defy just literally shut down overnight, and there was no warning really. Like they had announced that there was a plan to sort of like phase out over a few months, but they're like, don't worry, like it's gonna happen over the next, these are changes we're making. And then it was literally like a few days later, it's like, and everyone's gone, go home, we're done. And all of these different channels, Smosh Games, Clever, Warp Zone, were just left out in the cold, no access to any of their resources, locked out of their channels for a while, and with no roadmap to what their future was going to be. And we were literally next door, still in that building, watching it all happen. And for us, it's like, that would have been us. And who knows, we're a pretty big team as far as the internet goes and the number of people, and everyone is still there. I think largely because we got bought by Fandom, but it was a difficult process because we got bought, and then there was a kind of a shakeup, and then not in a bad way, but just how companies adjust. Like there were some adjustments in the company, so it took a while to really get the feet under us as far as what they wanted from us. We were just kind of doing what we had always done and what we did, but also at the same time kind of waiting for guidance about what was going on. And that's a long process when you're running a company like that. To get a vision for the future is a very long process. And so once that vision was kind of established was when I kind of started stepping back and saying, like, okay, where's my place in this? Where's my place in the future? What's my role going to be? And that's sort of when the contemplation began of like, do you think, is this a possibility? It doesn't look like I can really go down that road. And it doesn't really look like I can go down that road. And, what would my path here look like? And that's when it sort of started to become an actual question in my mind as far as like, what am I going to do that I think best serves me, and also what I want to do with my life, and what I'm excited about, and what makes me passionate, and that I want to share with people.
Yeah, what's next, so to speak. You mentioned just a second ago, and I know I've just got you for a couple more minutes here before we get out of here, but you mentioned just a minute ago that you got really excited about being a critic, and that was something that when you started to realize you might get to do it was really exciting. And I had a similar aspiration. I didn't grow up wanting to be a movie critic, but I do remember when funnily enough, actually launched a show called Nerds in Suits Movies with Anchor.fm back in 2018. That was the first time I put any content out under that name. I had basically like a relationship to the studios from various jobs I'd worked, and I just reached out to all of them and said, hey, I'm going to be reviewing for this company. Can I start going to these screenings? Because I had gone to a handful of press screenings, and they just started inviting me, which was like such a revelation. And I do remember the first press screening I ever went to was long before that. It was back in 2014 for a Paul Haggis movie called Third Person, I think.
Okay.
I think it was called Third Person. It had like Maria Bello, Mila Kunis, Liam Neeson. Not a great movie, but but I remember getting to screen it early and being like really excited to be in. And then now I've done a lot of it. Do you recall the first press screening you ever attended?
Let me think. It would have been sometime around 2014, 2015, like the first one that I was actually like invited to. I remember that I got to go to one for The Force Awakens, which was a big deal for me, like to be able to get in and see it early, because we were reviewing it. It was before I had become an individual critic, but we on the channel were going to review it, and I got to go. And that was for me, that was like, oh, wow. I got a Force Awakens invite. Like, I feel like I'm part of the big time. So that was one of the first ones that I remember being like, oh wow, that's cool. Like you can do this. This is fun. But in a lot of ways, it's almost a little tougher sometimes to establish those relationships when you're part of a bigger company, because there's a lot of different people inside the company that can review movies or that serve different roles. Like there's people that do junkets and there's people that don't do junkets, and so I actually struggled a little bit with some studios, because they don't necessarily know who to reach out to, because there may be 2 or 3 different people, or there's legacy people that they already know, and so being at a larger company in some ways was sort of a disadvantage, but also that's not a complaint, because I'm very lucky to have gotten access to the movies that I was able to go to, and that was a lot of them. It's a different vibe though than not when I want to say normal, but than a public screening, because it is critics and they're a little less expressive and perhaps a little more hard bitten about certain things. but it doesn't matter with the great movie. You know, the screenings I went to for really good movies, the response is the same as when I saw them with a paying audience. So I think the critics get a little bit of a bad rap sometimes because people think that they walk into a movie cynical. That may be the case for some critics, but I don't think it's the case for all critics.
Yeah, definitely, and I think those experiences sometimes they're hilarious. I mean, were you at the Fox one when the fire alarm kept going off at the end of Dark Phoenix?
Yes, yes, I was. I think they made. I don't think it affected the. I don't think it affected the critical reaction to that movie, but yes, when we went to Dark Phoenix, I guess there was 2 theaters. Now, were you in the one at the climax of the film, the big train action sequence? This fire alarm goes off in the theater. And now, were you in the one where they didn't stop the movie, or were you in the one where they did stop the movie?
So the one I was in, it's first the lights start going off, and anytime you're in a movie theater and it seems like the door is opening, people freak out because of violence. And so I think everybody jumped, and it kept going. The light kept going off, and then finally they stopped the movie and they got us all up and left, and then put us. I can't remember if it was in another theater or the same one. Then it went off again. And I barely remember the end of that movie. I mean, it was not a very good movie, but the whole experience at the end, it was just hilarious that it was the climax of the movie. I don't recall, but I know there was 2 theaters.
I was in the other theater. And what happened was the fire alarm went off, and it was such a loud sort of cacophonous action sequence that for like 3 or 4 minutes, I remember thinking like, this is an interesting creative choice, because it was sort of this droning sound that was going on throughout the whole thing. And then it became very clear that it was a fire alarm. But no one came in and no one said anything. And the movie kept playing. And then the lights came up, and then the lights went down. And then the lights came up, and then the lights went back down again. And still nobody came out and said anything. And they never stopped the movie. They never explained what was going on. They never said, we're going to replay it. They literally just this whole madness was going on for the last 20 minutes of the movie. And that was it. And I think the next day they were like, hey, if you want to see it again, you can see it tonight. But the embargo had already dropped. But if I were the Fox PR rep, I would have, number one, been furious at the theater for not doing better at saying what was happening. But then also you got to stop the movie and there's got to be a way to roll it back and to a certain point, because I don't think they did themselves any favors by kind of that happening, because it completely derailed whatever momentum the movie had going for it to that point.
Which, other than Michael Fassbender, was not very much.
Not a lot, no.
Yeah. So I have a couple last questions for you here, Dan. Before I get to them, guys, I do want to remind everybody here who's watching, please hit that subscribe button, the notification bell. I'm really trying to do this Nerds and Suits thing, and I appreciate you guys watching and listening. And go ahead and hit the thing. It would mean the world to me if you did. I think there's even a banner I can put here that's there it is, a ticker on the bottom. That's cool.
Yeah.
And check out the other videos on the channel. I've got an interview with Christian Harloff, was the first one that went up. And then, of course, the show song from a scene that launches next week, which I'm really excited about. I might do that song from The Wedding Singer. I Want to Grow Old With You. I'm not totally sure, but
that's a good one.
It's a good one. Yeah, it's real sweet. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. And we got a couple last minutes with Dan, and then I'm going to let you get out of here. So over the years, I know, man, you had a million cool guests come through Screen Junkies. You got to do stuff at Comic-Con. Do you have a memory of getting to do an interview that stuck with you, one that was really the highlight you always would think about?
Yeah, I mean, we did stuff with The Rock, which is great. He was always awesome to work with. I didn't do a lot of interviews, but the one that I will always remember is I did the junket. It's the only junket I've ever done, and it was because we were doing a bit for Comic-Con with Star Trek Beyond. And they sent me because I was literally the only person that knew Star Trek, and it was about very Star Trek-y things. And everyone was paired up, and I was so nervous because, number one, I love Star Trek. Number two, I don't do junkets. I don't talk to celebrities on a regular basis. And these were celebrities that I was a big fan of. And Simon Pegg and Carl Urban were paired together. And so we were doing a movie fights thing where, I present to them what's the best Star Trek movie, or what's the best this? And, it was a pre-recorded bit that we then played at Comic-Con. And so when you walk into an interview with Simon Pegg and Carl Urban, naturally you think that of the two of them, when you ask them a Star Trek question, that the one who's going to go deep down into it is the guy who co-wrote the movie, that movie, Simon Pegg. And plus he's a big kind of nerdy, kind of known for being into all this stuff. And so I asked him about, the favorite movie, and Simon Pegg gives a great answer about Wrath of Khan and why he thinks it's a great movie. And then Carl Urban, he gives the deepest cut thing. He's like, yeah, and he's from Australia, so he's got that Aussie accent. He's like, now I like Star Trek the motion picture because the thing about Dr. McCoy is he gets back into the service and then you've got Spock on Vulcan and he's going through Kolinar and he's going through this deep Vulcan train and he like goes into this like long like super detailed breakdown of like Star Trek lore and mythology, and I was just like sitting there like, I mean, it really threw me for a loop because, like, I got to admit, I did not expect that level of Trek knowledge from Carl Urban. So I'll always think about that because it really did. I was already kind of like on my heels because I love Shaun of the Dead. I love Dredd. I love both of those guys. And then Carl Urban completely shocked me with all of this, like, deep Star Trek knowledge. So he's either a huge fan or, like, that guy did his research before he did the movie.
It's also ballsy to pick the motion picture. I mean, I recently watched every single Star Trek movie so I could have a shot to not get skunked by you in a match. And I'd never seen like any of them. And that's a bad movie.
Easily one of the worst Star Trek movies. That is I would agree. This is one of the ballsiest picks to pick that as the best one.
Is that just the worst Star Trek movie? I mean, the only ones that I would say that possibly rival it, like 5 is really bad. And I think like Insurrection is really bad.
I don't know if it's the worst, but it is the least rewatchable. And it was the one that if you were to say, like, what Star Trek movie would you want to not watch right now? It's the motion picture because it's just so... The last time Mara and I watched it, we fast forwarded to like all these slow panning shots of ships in space. And I swear to God, it cut 25 minutes out of the movie. Like I'm not exaggerating, like literally 25 minutes out of the movie.
But of the bad Star Trek movies, I didn't find a lot to get back from that one. But I did find that because Shatner directs 5, and I think it's really funny that the movie opens up with like a very out of shape Shatner, like scaling, like rock climbing
El Capitan, like Alex Honnold, like free soloing El Capitan. Yeah, that's.
It's so ridiculous. I was like, that's of course Shatner has himself like free soloing El Capitan, and he's like so clearly just like too heavy to be on that rock face at that point.
Oh yeah, this great mighty strength of Captain Kirk. Like it's obviously like on a blue screen, like a backdrop thing. It's like that figures that shot. Although I do actually like that opening, as it's a great example of the Spock, Bones, Kirk trio. That's one of the things I like about that movie is that is a great interaction between the three of them and speaks to how those characters relate to each other.
The row your boat stuff.
Yeah, just all the stuff around the campfire, and even the fact that it's ridiculous that this obviously special effects riddled Shatner is climbing El Capitan, but the fact that Spock's got the rocket boots and he's distracting him and he's pointing out the illogical nature of climbing something like this, and then Bones worried on the ground, and it's a great interaction. There's not a lot to love about that movie, but that's one of them.
What's the line he says? What's he, beans? And so it's an explosive combination. What is it?
I remember you calling it marshmallows also, which there's a lot of fun stuff.
That's so funny. All right, last question. We'll keep it on Star Trek just because I when I'm rewatching them, and I know you're a gigantic fan. The one that really stood out to me, the surprising hit that I love that I think a lot of people hate, is Generations. And I wonder how you feel about Generations as a diehard Star Trek fan.
A lot of Star Trek fans don't like Generations. I think it might have to do with the fact of they don't really love how Captain Kirk goes out, which I get. It is a bit anticlimactic, and they even reshot that to be even more dramatic. And I agree that it could have been handled a little better, but I actually don't mind Generations. I think that it's a very striking difference in how it looks. Like they went way too far in the cinematic look of the ship because everything's in the dark all of a sudden. Like they went very dark with the aesthetic, and I think that's off-putting to some people too. But I love the Patrick Stewart storyline in that about just sort of understanding his mortality and that he's never had this family and now he doesn't have a chance. And I love how Malcolm McDowell manipulates that situation.
Yeah,
the whole they say time is the fire in which we burn. Like he's such a great villain. And I like the interaction between Scotty and Chekhov and Kirk at the beginning. I like the meeting of the captains. There's some stuff that's like, but I like Data with the emotion chip and learning I hate this. It is revolting. Like, I think that there's a lot to love in that movie. So I like Star Trek Generations. A lot of Trek fans don't. I do.
It's also one of the weird, like post Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Alan Ruck appearances. There's like only a few, like, Speed.
Yeah.
Very notable. And then obviously he's in that one. I do love though, when he's like, I'll go. And then Kirk has that moment where he's like, no, the captain's place is here on the bridge. And you're like,
Yeah.
God, you're such a hero, man.
No, and that moment of where he sits in the chair.
Yeah.
Like, I love that he sits down in the chair and then he has that moment of reflection and he's just like, no, your place is on the bridge. And that's literally just like those captain's instincts of like, oh man, do I want to take command of the ship? But I also know what it's like to not sit in this chair and the gravity and the weight that sitting in that chair has. There's more levels to that movie than some people give it, I think.
Because I think that's the stuff actually in the end why I connected to that movie more was like, I think there's some of the elder statesman stuff that Kirk gets to do in that movie that I think is cool, especially for me, had never having watched any of those movies and watching them all in such quick sequence, seeing him get older and older like that. There is some sort of gravity to him, making that respectful move. But anyway. Yeah. Star Trek, Jan, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you talking to me today. This was a blast for me, and I hope you guys watching had a good time as well. Obviously, I think probably if you're watching this, you're already subscribed to Dan Murrell, but if they're not, Dan, where can the folks find you and what you're doing?
YouTube.com/Dan Murrell Movies is my YouTube channel. It's been an amazing first week so far, and we're just looking to build from here. You can also find me on Patreon. Patreon.com/Dan Murrell. You can look into what I'm doing over there. You get early access to everything that I'm doing over on the YouTube side, except for like reviews and stuff that have to hit a certain date that I can't release early. But also, I'm doing a monthly movie club that you can get if you join Patreon. I'm doing a monthly film commentary at one of the tiers that you can get if you join Patreon. The community that we're building already over there has been so amazing to watch grow just in these last few days. We've got a Discord community that I'm learning how to use Discord and how to figure all this stuff out. It's been such an amazing series of new adventures, and it was really it's been really difficult to in some ways leave behind the community at Screen Junkies, but there's so many of those folks that have decided to make the jump over and support both of us, which is incredible. And to reconnect with some people, to meet some new people, it's been a lot of fun so far. A lot of work, but a lot of fun too. So that's where you can find me, and I'm having a blast. I'm loving it.
Cool, man. Well, guys, be sure to hit that subscribe button, the notification bell below. Leave your thoughts and comments below. You can find me everywhere at Ben Bateman Media, and of course, Nerds and Suits everywhere on all the socials at Nerds and Suits. Check out the Action Guys every Sunday night. Dan was a recent guest. We've got Matt Iceman from American Ninja Warriors, our guest this Sunday night. We're really excited about that. And otherwise, guys, keep it classy. Thanks for hanging out. I will see you on the next one.